Hello, welcome along to the Test Match Special podcast. I'm Jonathan Agnew, and you may have listened to an episode earlier in this series where I was surprised by Sir Michael Parkinson and interviewed myself to celebrate 25 years of Test Match Special. Well, that wasn't the first time such a trick has been pulled. This episode from our 40 from 40 series sees Brian Johnson, the king prankster himself, given a shock on the occasion of his 80th birthday in 1992. Producer Peter Baxter needed to find someone who would be a believable guest for Johners to interview, but who could also turn the tables and ask the questions instead. So step forward the broadcaster, Ned Sherrin, a guest Brian had long wanted to speak to. Well, unknown to Johners, a studio in London was also in on the game and handed back to Lords for a mighty surprise.
We're turning the tables on you today, Brian. This is your boundary.
What are you doing to me?
You're being interviewed. I am not.
I don't believe this.
Absolutely true. Aren't you going to be 80 on Wednesday? Haven't we been hearing about that all week?
That's right. I was going to ask you a few questions.
How do I fill sort of half an hour talking to you? Because you must. I mean, you've done 46 years. Have you ever counted up the number of hours that you've rambled on up here?
Rambles ago. Yeah, because I didn't ramble quite so many words, of course, in the first 24 years, because I did the telly, you see, and one was then meant only to speak when you could add to the picture, which, if you watch very closely, you needn't speak at all, really. That was our first thing we were told about television commentary.
Your first cricket team was Temple Grove, wasn't it, where you played with Douglas Bader, I gather?
He was very popular because he was a brilliant cricketer, and every Saturday he used to get 100 against schools like St Andrews and Anthony's and all that. And we used to get off prep every time he got 100.
It was before the legs went, presumably.
Well, that was right. And he was a marvellous rugby player too, so he'd have played for England at both, I think. I'm sure he would have.
Then there was a terrible irony or terrible injustice of your Eton career not being crowned with the wicket-keeping for the first team.
I don't know about injustice, but a chap did stay on a little bit longer. He was 19 and a half, I think, and I captained the second 11, and as usual I had probably more fun doing that. And the trouble was, when he came here, we had two very fast bowlers called Page and Hambry, and if you look up in the record of 1931, he let 35 by. Well, goodness knows how many I'd have let. So that I had a quiet chuckle. He was a very nice chap, and we were friends.
And you had the sympathy of a great cricketer at the time, George Hurst, didn't you?
George Hurst was the coach there, and one of the most lovable characters you could ever think of. And he took me under his wing, partly because just previously to the Lord's match, I'd stumped someone down the leg side of him. He was a little round ball of a man then, used to bowl left arm around the wicket, sort of in the swingers, and I actually whipped off the furnitures, and so he rather liked me. He took me all round Lords when I came up here, took me up the score box and introduced me to everybody, umpires. So he was a lovely man.
The early hero was Patsy Hendren, wasn't it?
Patsy, I became a hero of his when my brother threw me a cricket bat when I was age 7 and said, "You're Patsy Hendren, I'm Jack Hearn." And I worshipped him from that moment, and I used to get the Times before my father could get it and put it on the floor and look at all the cricket scores. And I then read in a paper one day, an advertisement said, "Why not take Wincarnis wine like E. Patsy Hendren of 26 Cairn Avenue, Ealing, London, W5. Well, who should give an address nowadays like that? Imagine Ian Botham doing it. Yeah, I did. Wrote to him, said, "Please, Mr. Hendren, can I have your autograph?" And he wrote back and said, he didn't say anything, just 3 little autographs. And the only thing about that is the effect he's had on my life. That Patsy, he never crossed the T. And when he wrote Hendren, under the N at the end of Hendren, there are 2 little lines. And when I sign my autograph now, it's Johnston without a cross T and 2 little lines. So he had a great effect.
What about this trick, which has never been done on radio before, I gather, and I shall have to describe it, the ability to tuck your right ear in...
Take the headphones off.
Yes, take the headphones off. They're quite useless for you.
Well, I used to be able to tuck both in, and I think only one stays in. I have done this on Derek Nimmo's show and on Parkinson.
The lobe is going in.
The lobe is going in,
the bottom
and it'll stay in. It's because hot weather it stays in rather longer, and then I can flip it out by going like that.
Beautiful. Bravo.
First time it's been tucked in on the air.
Now, I hadn't realised that you'd had a sort of distinguished career by political association. You and Neville Chamberlain were godfathers to the same child.
Right, Alec Douglas Hume, his lordship. He made me and Neville Chamberlain a very nice daughter he had called Mary, and we were our joint godfathers. And I went to see him off because he went with Neville Chamberlain to Munich, and he was short of a shirt. He was suddenly told he was going to. He came round to William, his brother. We shared a house. Anybody got a spare shirt? I got to go off to Munich to see Hitler. So we lent him a shirt. We went down to Heston, and they got into a tiny little aeroplane. I mean, the sort of thing you see at a display of moths or something, and all strapped up and everything. And they got into this and went off to Munich. Most extraordinary. The Prime Minister of England in a black Homburg. Always.
We better move on to the actual after the war period. But is there one fragrant pre-war memory? I mean, you were shipped off to broke coffee or something in Brazil for a long time. Were you captain of the Brazilian national side then?
No, I didn't. I went to study the coffee bean. I didn't learn much about it. There are an awful lot of coffee beans in Brazil. But I did play cricket out there on the mat. And what my only real triumph was when an American cruiser came in, and we took them on a softball, which is equivalent to baseball, and slightly, I think the ball's slightly bigger. And I scored a home run because they have no mid-off at baseball, and I hit the ball through mid-off, and I got a home run.
Back here in England after the war, 46, you joined the BBC. Was that a chapter of accidents or a chapter of luck?
A chapter of luck, because when I was in the Grenadiers in the war, Winford Vaughan Thomas and Stuart McPherson came down to brush up on their war reporting in Norfolk before they went across to Normandy. And they came and had supper in a wood with us in Norfolk, and I got to know them then, and I thought no more about it. And after the war, I happened to meet them at a dinner party, and they said, "Oh, we're short of people at the BBC, come and do a test." And they stuck me out in Oxford Street. And they said, "You ask passers-by what they think of the butter ration, but you ask silly questions, you get silly answers." But they said, "Not very good, but at least you kept talking. Come and join us." And I said, "Well, I really want to go into the theatre somewhere." But they said, "No, come and join us for 3 months." And I stayed till 1972 when I had to retire.
The television box had 3 distinguished names alongside yours early on: PGH, Fender, Crusoe, and Aidan Crawley. Robinson Glasgow, the best cricket writer ever.
Absolutely, and a great humorist. He didn't quite come over on the telly so much. He had rather sort of sepulchral voice, but he was very funny. And when the producer sort of said, "Will you give the score, Chris?" For those who weren't listening when I gave it 2 balls ago, I mean, and repeated the score. And Percy Fender, indignant, because he had a nose even bigger than mine, and the chap up the line said, "Mr. Fender, will you please hold the microphone nearer to you? We can't hear you." And nothing happened, and they said, "No, we still can't hear you. Will you hold it so it's touching your nose?" And he said, "I am," and of course he was miles away from his mouth. But he got indignant. He was talking about Hayward, how he used to wear a Panama hat when he was playing for Surrey. And this was in the middle of a rather exciting hat-trick, I think. And the producer said, "Stick to the cricket, Percy." And he put his microphone down. I said, "He said, clever, let him do it himself." You know, they were a bit irregular in those days.
It's interesting now the Somerset tradition of excellent cricket writing has continued. You've got young Marks up here, and there's Roebuck doing it for the Times.
Yeah, but Mark's got a rotten name for Somerset. I mean, it's so short. I mean, there used to be Critchley Salmonsons, didn't there? And all
Randall Johnson, yes.
And wonderful names like C.C. Case.
Yes, he's just before me. Horace Hazel.
Horace Hazel. And Lucky is behind the timbers.
Wally Lucky is HTF Buse. Anyway, we'll do that. You can ask me about Somerset when I really am your guest. We better stay with you.
You'll have to come another time.
Stay with you. Stay with you for the moment. And you, poor Pauline, you postponed your wedding simply because there was a test match.
Well, it was...
Move the date, Brian.
Well,
Come on, admit.
We had to get married a bit earlier. It was a rather good thing, really, because I wanted to make sure of being here for the test match. And the Colonel, her father, wasn't too pleased, because I proposed to her after a week, and she gave me an answer after a month. And then we decided we had to get married before the cricket season started, so we were married within 3 months. But it seems to have worked. People live together these days, but we didn't, and it seems to have worked.
Where are these tattoos that she disapproves of so much?
I've only got one just on my left arm here, which is of 2 cross cricket bats, which I went to do when I was doing In Town Tonight. We went down the ship, I don't know what it was called, something union, the Shipbuilders Union or something, down in the East End. And this chap with a little electric needle, I was interviewing him, and he's so nervous. And the bats don't look anything like bats, and the little ball doesn't look like a ball, but it's on my left forearm, and I can be recognised by that. We'd
better examine the question, I suppose, of the gaffes. The famous one is the batsman's holding, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's the only one I didn't know I'd done. I got a letter from a lady who said, "Mr. Johnson, we do enjoy our commentaries very much, but you must be more careful. We have a lot of young people listening. Do you realise what you said the other day at the Oval when Michael Holding was bowling Peter Willey? You said, 'Welcome to the Oval, but the bowler's Holding, the batsman's Willey,' which no one told me about it at the time. So she said, 'You've got to be more careful.' But I didn't realise I'd done that one.
Well, then you got both of them into trouble with the leg over situation.
Well, this is Aggers' fault. You see, we were perfectly normal last season, the Friday of the Oval Test match. Bad lie to stop play. Producer, who bullies it like mad, said, 'Go through the scorecard.' So we went through the scorecard and we got to Ian Botham, who'd hit wicket. And Aggers made a very long explanation of why he did it and couldn't quite see why he tried to hook that ball. And very, very bad ugly. And he said, in the end, he just couldn't get his leg over. And I said, couldn't get it. I got as far as that. And then but I was very, I think, more professional then than I've ever been, because I went on reading the scorecard for at least 30 seconds without going. And then I had to, and so I went wheezing away. But what didn't help, Peter Baxter, stupid arse, said to Aggers, 'Say something.' Well, Aggers was hysterical. Well, all Aggers could get out was Lawrence, and he went off after saying Lawrence, and he was laughing. But the interesting thing is, in those giggles, we've had lots in the box. We've always had a professional like Trevor Bailey or Richie Benno on television who'd take over. But we had Tony
person with
Cozy.
no sense of humour, you mean?
No, professional, disciplinarian. And we had Tony Cozy this time, who just sat silent in the thing, just listening to it all. And he should have taken over and said, 'Well, I'll go on with the scorecard.' But none of that. So we were made to look rather stupid.
Has Mrs. Rex Alston forgiven you yet?
From Southampton to Edgerton, where they're playing late up there at 7 p.m. So over now for some more balls from Rex Alston. She didn't forgive me for a long time about that.
Which do you prefer, the cricket ones or the state occasion ones? I mean, is it apocryphal, the one about there's Princess Diana going up the steps into the pavilion?
No, that was right, because I was on Queen Anne's statue for her wedding.
Queen Anne's wedding? No,
not Queen Anne so much as Lady Diana. She was in, and I was on her statue there, looking over my shoulder, coming up Ludgate Hill. I saw this carriage with two outriders, and here's Lady Diana coming up now. And her carriage will draw up below me. She'll be met by her father, Earl Spencer, and they'll walk up the steps into the pavilion. I mean cathedral. And up they went.
We haven't been able to trace that one, actually. It has been sought, but nobody can find it.
No one find it.
No.
It's about somewhere, but it wasn't a very good one.
The funeral of George VI, I imagine, is extant.
Yes, that was unfortunate because and the listener didn't know what had gone wrong, but I had been booked to do this with Richard Dimbleby, of all people. He was in St James Street and I was at Hyde Park Corner, and I thought I must get this right, and I wrote down the opening and read it to myself as I went to sleep every night for about 5, well, how much do you have before funeral? About 5 days or something. And I wrote down, "Here comes the procession now, led by 5 Metropolitan Policemen mounted," and they told me they'll be on white horses. And of course, when the day came, I heard Richard Dimbleby say over to Brian Johnson, Hyde Park Corner, and Keith Rogers, my producer, "Go ahead, Brian, good luck." And I said, "Yes, and here comes the procession now, led by 5 Metropolitan Policemen mounted." And they came round the bend, and they were on black horses. You see. Well, at least they had black and white then, so there's no point in pretending. So all I lamely said, "Mounted on horseback." And Keith Rogers, in this very serious occasion, said, "What on earth do you think they're mounted on? Camels?" and there was I still trying to be serious.
There wasn't there a time when I think it was after Home Moss, when Old Trafford and Headingley came into play, when suddenly you were commenting on a close up of Yardley.
This was at Trent Bridge, the first time we went there, when Weeks and Worrell put on 200 and goodness knows what. And at about 4 o'clock, I remember saying, Norman Yardley's got to do something about this. I wonder what he's thinking. Let's have a look at him. And there he was mid-on, and as we put the camera on him in close-up, he was scratching himself in a very unfortunate place. So I quickly said, well, obviously a very ticklish problem, but his wife gave him the most terrible rocket when he got back. Poor Norman, what a lovely chap he was.
There was a definite, you're a sort of precursor of Jeremy Beadle in your radio career too, weren't you? I mean, there were all those sort of practical jokes you used to play on the radio. There was the restaurant gag with Cliff Mitchelmore and 2 other commentators.
Yes, that was rather extraordinary to see what people's reactions were. Cliff Mitchelmore was a guest, and was this when I was disguised as the waiter?
Yeah.
Yes, and we sort of did things like everybody had a lovely bit of Dover sole, except for the chap's legs we were pulling, and when it was put down to him, there was just the backbone with just the head and the tail on, and Mitchelmore was the host and said, "Quite happy with our fish," and this chap said, "Oh, yeah, very good, yes, very good," and, never reacted at all. all. And we did these things like at the railway station at Victoria. We see people's reactions, and I had a face on a mask like a wolf. And I heard people say, look, there's a wolf there, let's go, we must catch the train. And we said, will the people who've taken the 8:18 train from platform 6 please return, it's needed first thing in the morning. All these going out, it was quite funny.
Gives one faith in the imperturbability of the British character.
Just out at Victoria Station, we had this marvellous thing where Kenneth Hall and I tried to give money away. We literally did the old thing of £1 notes. And people wouldn't he was saying something about his old aunt having left him money and wanted to distribute and all that. And but people just didn't take him at all. That's extraordinary.
Did you enjoy tremendously the change from commentating on the television to switching to the radio?
Well, I mean, let's just say that radio is a more natural medium, and it is easier because you keep on editing yourself on television. But people, if you're very, very technical, you don't really want to be told what is happening because you understand it. And if you don't understand it, you don't understand the technicality. So a television commentator's in a difficult position, and perhaps they prefer some of them, and they like to check up on the old jokes, which they get every now and again.
How did you enjoy your first trip to Australia? Because it was quite late in life.
I did 10 years, and you get a thing called grace leave in the BBC, and they let you go without paying you, but you can go off for 3 months. So I took myself there, and then the BBC very kindly said, well, we'll use you once you're there. And I went out, very posh, first class in a Britannia, and arrived 24 hours before the test match started in Melbourne, and went there, and there was a chap commentating to start with, and they said, you've got to go on second, Alan McGilvray's aeroplane's left. And when I started, England was 7-3, which wasn't a very good start. And at that moment, a pigeon dropped something from the rafters in that big stand at Melbourne, and that was my christening to Australia.
This was the time when Benno was captain, wasn't he? And there were 3 bowlers who you accused of blatant chucking.
I never accused them at all, but the umpires should have known. There was Mekif, who really did. He was a bit... And I remember seeing Slater, who was off-spin bowling in the nets, and I said, what a good idea, because so often people bowl at the nets, much better to chuck at someone because you can be more accurate. The chap said he is bowling. Slater, we didn't mind about him, but Mekif was a bit dangerous.
How many tours have you done since then? How many tours have you done?
Well, I did altogether 10 tours. And the one I was very proud of, I was the neutral commentator for the last test matches that South Africa played when Australia went there. I was the neutral one between Charles Fortune and Alan McGilvray.
One of your favourite interviews is with Uffa Fox. And you had a problem understanding how he and his wife, he spoke no French and she spoke no English.
That's right. I was interviewing him on telly, and I said, it's very extraordinary. Explaining to me personally, your wife speaks no French and no English, and you speak no French. How does it work? And he said, my dear fellow, only 3 things in life worth doing: eating, drinking, or making love. And if you speak doing any of those, you're wasting your time, which is a good philosophy. He was a lovely chap.
How about umpires? I like the story very much of the Duke of Norfolk's umpire.
Well, this is the old classic. It's an old one, really. But he used to run these matches.
That's never stopped you before, bro.
No, never stopped me. Won't ever again. I told it only about 10 times last week. But he was playing a match against the Sussex Martlets, and at 11 o'clock start, 11:15, umpire short. So the Duke said, all right, I'll go down to the castle, I'll get my butler Meadows. So he goes down his shooting break, the Labradors, the back goes down, goes through the green baize door, and there's Meadows, the butler, polishing all the silver and all that. And he says, Meadows, take your apron off and put a white coat on and come and umpire. It was one of those days, gentle drizzle, not wet enough to go off, but making the ground very slippery. And the Duke came in at number 10, and he was 110 for 8 his side, and he was a non-striker. So the chap batting thought, well, better let him have the bowling. Pushed one to cover, said, come on, Grace, come on. And his Grace set off, and he slipped up, landed, slapping his face in the middle of the pitch. Colour Point picked the ball up, threw it over the top of the stumps. Wicketkeeper whipped off the bails, turned the square leg umpire and said, how's that? Square leg umpire, and everybody was Meadows, the butler. I said, what does he do? The master line player. And he drew himself up, and he said, his Grace is not in, which was rather nice. That's an old classic.
There's a nice, is it equally Shop's Oil, the Bradman one, when he was defending Australian umpires?
Yeah, this is a friend of mine called Tom Crawford was arguing with Don. This was during Peter May's tour, where there'd been a very good umpire on the previous tour, Len Hutton's, called McInnes. He was not quite so good on this tour. And Tom Crawford was saying what we often say, our umpires at home, it doesn't quite apply now, but they've all been old test cricketers and they know what goes out in the middle. And he said to Don, trouble with your people, they learn all the laws and stuff, but they've never actually played first-class cricket. And Don said, what about McGuinness? He said, what about McGuinness? He played for South Australia until his eyesight went, and then he realised what he said.
we're drawing peacefully to a close, I think. But perhaps can you pick out a special, since we're at Lord's, a special Lord's memory?
Well, I suppose the best one was in 1969 when Alan Ward of Derbyshire bowling his first Test match. Off the fifth ball of one of his overs from this end, bowling to Glenn Turner in New Zealand, hit him very hard in the box. He collapses in the crease, and the cameras pan in, and there he is lying in the crease. You pretend he's been hit anywhere except where he has, a bit rude. And suddenly he gets up, so he's looking a bit pale, but very plucky. He's going on batting. One ball left, which was absolutely true. It was.
Now, I was hoping for an epic cricketing memory, Brian. I wasn't hoping for another bit of sleeves.
The epic is undoubtedly their best Test match of all, 1963, one of the great Test matches when Colin Cowdrey came out with a wrist in plaster, 2 balls to go, 6 runs to win, David Allen, and just starting the last over, we'd got Shackleton out, there were 2 balls to go. And at that moment, just about to start, my producer said, right, hand back to News Alexander Palace. But luckily, Kenneth Adam, who was then mad on cricket and was director, he was listening at home, got on the telephone at once, said, go back at once. In the middle of saying something about President Kennedy, they said, we've got to go back to Lord's, and we got the last over. And I think that was the most dramatic of the lot.
Well, wasn't Brian as good a guest as he was an interviewer? I hope the man who made View from the Boundary his own would have enjoyed the many names and voices we've had on the programme since his death in 1994.